Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I should like to convene this meeting of the New York State DNA Subcommittee, and I should like to welcome members of the committee, members of the DCGS staff, and as well as some guests from the various crime laboratories throughout the state and the New York City Police Department. For the record, we have a quorum here today. We have present here Drs. Buell, Kidd, Hirsch and Eastman, as well as myself, Ballantyne. Two of our committee members, Drs. Bieber and Batzer, pass on their regrets they couldn't make this meeting, but we do have a quorum here today. So the first item on the agenda is to review the meeting agenda, review and approve the meeting agenda, and the committee has in front of them a proposed agenda. So what we have to do is look at this agenda and decide whether or not to proceed as planned.
So moved.
In fact, yes, thank you, Dr. Hirsch. My suggestion is, because of some logistical issues, item 6 is new business, and item 7 was the laboratory disclosures. The new business was partial match update, and subsequent to that was item 7, lab disclosures from Suffolk County, New York City. I suggest that we reverse the order so that we do the lab disclosures first. That would be new item 6, and then after that have the partial match update, and then proceed with the rest of the agenda.
I will move the amended agenda.
Any discussion? All those in favour of the revised agenda time scale, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Okay. So the next item is to review and approve the draft minutes from the last meeting, which was March 23rd, 2012. And the committee has a copy of the draft minutes, the draft meeting minutes from the last meeting.
There were some changes made that were sent to us, is that correct?
Apparently there's some spelling
There were some typos.
typos, but if you didn't read the first time, it didn't matter.
It didn't really matter. I'll move that the meeting minutes be accepted as modified.
Second.
Any discussion? No. So all those in favour of approving the minutes, the draft meeting minutes as we have in front of us, the amended version, with the spelling errors corrected, say aye. Aye. Unanimous. Thank you. The next item is accreditation and laboratory updates. And the first laboratory update is Nassau County, the Nassau County Office of the Medical Examiner, Division of Forensic Services. And I think we're lucky enough to have Karen Dooling from the Nassau County Medical Examiner's office here. Karen, would you like to give us a briefing as to what transpired?
I would love to. So we had ASCOT Lab in for our annual surveillance visit on March 8th.
Yes, I just handed out today their corrective action.
So we had 2 corrective action requests. One dealt with ASCOT Lab International Standard 4141, which is the internal audit conducted in accordance with the ASCOT Lab International supplemental and ISO requirements. And the other CAR dealt with 4151, which is management reviews. So we have submitted our remediation plan, our corrective action plan, within the 30 days required, which is what you see before you. And much of it is described in there. The internal audit did happen for 2011, and I guess the easiest way to sum this up is annually, in excess of all our requirements, we do an annual quality review. And in our quality manual, we define our annual quality review as our management review. So it encompasses a whole lot of elements. It takes us quite some time. We review all internal, external audits. At the close of that, there is a line in here that indicates that we are up to date with all international 17025 standards. They didn't feel that was enough documentation to show that we had audited in accordance to the standards. In addition to that, we've just transitioned from legacy to ISO. When you're in the legacy program and you have to give your annual report to ASCAD Lab, it's a requirement that you fill out their audit document. When you transition to ISO, it's not necessarily a requirement that you fill out that document. So I struggled whether to fill the document out or put it as part of our annual quality review, and obviously I made the wrong choice. So next year, this year, we will be using the audit document, just as we do the FBI QAS. You know, as you can see, we had that audit also. And then for the management review, again, that quality review was meant to encompass all the elements. There were a few elements, again, that were not documented as part of that quality review, so we missed the mark. You know, do we talk about those things? Yes, in our management meetings. So in the quality manual, I've now separated those things out. The management review is separate and distinct from the annual quality review, separate and distinct from the audit to the international standards and the FBI QA audit. So that's a lot of words.
Yes. Thank you.
But that is the plan. If anybody has any questions.
Any questions? Eric, any questions?
I'm just going to review this just briefly.
All right. Basically what this appears to be is that in terms of any of the DNA stuff, the DNA audits are separate, that all that's being done. This is this extra layer of review that ISO requires, way above and beyond checking the quality system. You're checking the overall system, basically, right? So
when I was last here, you went over our external from last
Yeah.
year with the one finding of the corrective action for continuing education.
And so this document we got today is your CAR, that's your official response to ASCLAD Lab.
Right, then they
saying,
have to accept the plan.
Yes.
And then we provide them documentation. Once they say this plan is acceptable, that we remediate the plan. And that
Yeah.
remediation will be, you know, doing all our audits probably a little sooner than we would have, documenting everything and submitting all our documentation.
If I understood your comment correctly, all of the substantive requirements were being met, but there was not the separate, distinct documentation that is required by the standards.
Right, I documented that we reviewed all the international 17025 standards, and we do that every year. But again, in legacy, you have to fill out that audit document. I chose not to. And I actually had a few conversations with people in the lab about it. So I made the wrong choice for documentation, and I can see from their perspective how they feel it's not enough documentation. You know, we didn't document it properly, and it didn't happen. That's, you know, I accept that. So we will document it differently and appropriately this year.
I think these, when you merge the two types of approaches, this is a normal kind of thing that happens, because the ASCLAD Lab approach was, can you do the work properly? You know, do you get the correct results? It's an error-free analysis type of thing. Whereas the ISO is more, can you manage this system? Can you manage the ability to provide the results? And so there is this, and when you merge the two, then you get the two aspects that have to basically be tied in.
And our own quality reviews is self-imposed. This additional audit, quality one that we do. Next time we get the corrective action, we'll see actually what it entails. That would be part of the write-up for the corrective action. More to come.
Okay. So any other comments, questions? Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you.
There's no vote on this. It's just a matter of for information purposes. Okay. The next item on the agenda is old business DNA quality assurance audits, and we had a question last time. The committee had a question last time on Onondaga County. Their questions regarding their audit process, and we received some documentation from Onondaga. And do we have an Onondaga representative here?
Dr. Kathleen Corrado is on the phone,
Yes.
I think.
Dr. Corrado?
Hi, I'm here. Dr. Valentine, could I just ask you, I'm sorry, if you could speak maybe a little closer to a speaker? I'm
Yes.
having a hard time.
Okay. Yeah.
No? This is the speaker?
Is this a speaker?
This was supposed to-
No, it's not. Oh, but it says. Okay, Dr. Corrado, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't realise that you were on the phone, and this is a big meeting room. So anyway, we had a question last time about just the audit process itself conducted by your lab. And since you weren't there, we tabled the motion basically to discuss your lab. So we have from you a letter to the DNA subcommittee explaining what how your audit process occurs. So do you want to give us maybe a short briefing as to the contents of the letter?
Sure. I think, and I apologize again for not being available at the last meeting, but I watched the meeting online, and my understanding was there was a question because of, I think, probably the way, unfortunately, we documented our audit. It appears that we performed the audit in a single day because I had just a single date listed on there as November 18th. But in actuality, the person that did it was one of our senior analysts that conducted the audit for us internally this year. And she did it over a number of days. The problem was she started the audit and was looking at a lot of the documents, including the policies and procedures and the calibration records and the lot records and everything else. And she didn't, she was doing it in addition to some of her other duties. She was involved in training another analyst, and also in between there she had to attend a mandatory training class. So she wasn't able to, she didn't start the audit on one day and do it 8 hours a day until it was completed. She kind of did it on various days when she could fit it in. And because of that, I assumed, and maybe I assumed incorrectly, but I thought it would not be accurate to say, she started on this day and finished on this day, because I didn't want to give the wrong impression that she was doing it 8 hours a day for that many days. But I guess that's probably not the right way to do it, because in the way I just ended up putting the date that the audit was completed on the documentation to show, this was the date the audit was completed. But instead I realized I probably should have done it the other way, listing the longer dates, because it would have at least made clear that we didn't just do the audit in a single day. So that's basically what the letter says. The other issue that I know there was a standard that was questioned, it was the standard about does the lab QC separate polymerases, primer sets, and allelic ladders. And I think we had inadvertently checked yes and not applicable at the same time. It should have been not applicable because we only purchased the commercial kits and validate or QC our reagents with the kit. So that really should have been an NA. I think it was just administrative oversight that we accidentally checked yes as well. I don't know if there's any other questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Comments?
I don't have any questions. Just want to make a comment that, having been involved in a lot of internal audits, I don't really assume that you're doing it full time, because I know there's a lot of front burner stuff that takes you off the audit that have to get taken care of. So I just think that date range, even if it's not full time, is fine.
That's good to know. I mean, I think that's what it seemed like. I noticed in some of the other documents that's what people are doing. So that is what we'll do in the future. In the past, we've really tried to do it as best we could in a single amount of time. So the previous internals that we've done, we did list the date range, but it was, 2 or 3 days. It didn't expand weeks, so I guess I wasn't clear on how to do that. But I agree with you. It probably makes more sense to just put what the dates were, and, then that's in a more accurate function of what was done.
At least Kathleen, anyway, I suppose the issue here was, how did it take so short a time to do the audit? And it turns out, in fact, you took a long time. So the impetus for asking the question, I think it's been satisfactorily answered, that basically you did take longer than 1 day to do this. And that was the concern, I think, that was expressed.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And unfortunately, if I had been there during the discussion, probably it would have been cleared up sooner. But again, I apologize for that as well.
Yeah. And I noticed that you had this very, very serious issue of D16S539 was labelled as D16S359. Someone caught that one. That shows you some auditor is doing his or her job quite well.
Yes, I agree, although I have to say realizing that was in our template was a little embarrassing too, because I had been there for a while and no one else had seen it. So we were glad that at least it was pointed out so we could correct it right away.
At least you found it before Eric Buell found it. So, any other comments, questions?
Would this have any issues on reports that were sent out with that labeled as such, and should there be any corrections or anything like that, or what do you feel about that, Kathleen?
That, first of all, I will say that was from our 2010 external audit, which has been already dealt with. But where that typographical error was in our method section. We list out which kit we used, and we say the following loci were looked at, and it's listed in there. So it basically said what the kit was. So the correct kit was in there, and it was just the transposition of those two numbers on that one locus. And it was in the method section. In our results section, in our allele table, it was the locus was correctly identified. And in our, when we talk about our results and our statistics, the locus was correctly identified. So we felt that it really wasn't something that would affect the results, that anyone reading the report would have been misled, because we specifically say what the kit was. And we also had it correct in the two areas where the results were given. It was only in the material of the methods part of the report that it was incorrect. So we felt like, and it would have been, every one of our DNA reports over a certain amount of time. And we sort of felt like to send amended reports to every one of our agencies for that small thing probably would have caused more confusion than it would have, solved any other issue that might have occurred.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to see if you went through the thought process on it. You have, and it sounds good to me.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? No? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Corrado. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is laboratory disclosures, and we have Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. This is basically there's an internal memo that was provided to us, but we have Joe Galdi from the Suffolk County Crime Lab here to give us a short briefing, perhaps, as to what has happened in this ongoing situation.
Okay, well, we've completed our work in this. We determined the root cause of what had happened. That had been determined fairly early on. The analyst went through retraining, performed a competency test, which was successfully completed. We also reviewed all of the casework the analyst had performed during the year 2011 prior to her last previous successful external proficiency test. That review did uncover one other incident where contamination had occurred, and we've since sent out a corrected report on that case as well.
And the analyst is now back in online with casework?
Hi. Joe, would you mind just going over from your memo of April 6th, part 3 there? Casework was reviewed in the database using the CODIS software. Could you just describe that for me, how that works, how that was able to pick up the problems that you found?
What we have done is we've set up what we refer to as a QA database using the CODIS software. We enter all profiles that we have generated from all casework, proficiency tests, everything that's run in the laboratory, put into CODIS and search these samples against each other just to see if anything matches between cases. This arose from an issue we had last year where we had a case-to-case contamination, which we couldn't catch through a regular technical review, and this procedure was developed as a means of catching that type of thing. So when we did this search, we found a sample from one case that matched a exemplar from an unrelated case. And then examining when these samples had been analyzed, it was determined the exemplar sample had been cut out a day prior to the forensic sample that had the same profile. And based on that, we determined that that was another contamination issue.
Okay. Yeah. And when you found that occurred, I guess you went back to and pulled out appropriate samples that were perhaps in CODIS that shouldn't have been or something?
Yes.
So, Joe, now I know there are rules and regulations in different jurisdictions regarding this, but it's prudent often that a lab would have an elimination database of their own staff members, because obviously if we work in DNA, and I work in DNA, and I know all the people that work in my lab. I'm a research lab, so we can immediately say there's contamination, et cetera, et cetera. Does Suffolk County, because I don't know what it's like in every lab, but do you have an elimination database as such, or are they all lumped together in this quality database? That means all the samples you've ever examined plus analysts, or are there reasons why your analysts shouldn't be in there or whatever? Because obviously if your analyst is there, you'll pick up immediately that this case is contaminated by an analyst.
Yes and no, and all of our analysts are in our database as elimination known samples, not just members of the biology section, but anybody in the laboratory who potentially would be handling biological evidence is in our database. The reason why this one sample wasn't caught, and you're referring to the one where the analyst contaminated with her own DNA, is that particular case was a criminal possession of a weapon case, which is not CODIS eligible, so that sample was not entered into CODIS, and that's how we didn't catch that it was her DNA that was present on the sample. But now again, that we are doing this QA databasing procedure, we would catch if something similar happens in the future, we would catch it.
Okay.
I've got just one other question for you, Joe, on the last page of the memo, 9B. What's a non-conclusive DNA result? I guess I'm just wondering if you have a mixture, would that be a non-conclusive result? Because mixtures were a problem here.
It's non-conclusive means that we would not be able to do any kind of comparison with known samples with that profile. Either no DNA was found, or it was DNA below threshold, or something where we couldn't do a comparison with knowns.
Okay. So you normally do comparisons with knowns if you have mixtures and that sort of thing?
If we can, yes.
Yes.
It comes to mind, is there a threshold of a different sort in terms of how many of the loci are giving a result above the threshold that you could use? If, say, 2 loci have one allele above the threshold, everything else is too low a level. Is that also
I'd have to see I'm sorry, I'd have to see the particular circumstances of the case, whether
Okay,
it's
so it would be an
or not. It's on a
individual.
case-by-case basis. And
Fine.
each of these cases were examined, and if there was a case where the determination was made that the profile was inconclusive and could not be compared to known profiles, else, then that was where it ended, as far as this review is concerned.
Okay.
So you,
Sorry, Andrew. No.
so you feel the action is done in this except for this mock trial roundtable discussion?
Yes, we're still arranging that. All of the documents that we produced as part of this have been given to the district attorney's office. They're going to sit down and determine how to proceed with setting up this mock trial type of protocol. So that still hasn't occurred, but we didn't feel that precluded her from getting back to working on a casework again.
Has she testified during any of this time? Did any of this come out during the trial?
No testimony is in.
Joe, I think there's some interesting lessons to be learned from these incidents. There always is, right? And the issue that I think of is the contamination of implements used to cut evidence out, et cetera, et cetera. So I see now that what you do is you've decided to, because it's easy to contaminate utensils, implements, that you've established a white testing procedure that you then check. Could you share with us what you've been finding with that, and what good practice would be?
We just started it, and what we're basically doing, in fact, someone is working on it as we speak now. Someone is going to each analyst's work area and swabbing their instruments. And we had done this when this first occurred, and that's how we found that this analyst's implement had this DNA profile still on it at the time. We're doing the same procedure where someone's taking cotton swabs, swabbing the implements, and then performing DNA testing on those swabs. The analysts involved in this incident, we're going to be doing this on a monthly basis to the end of the year. All the other analysts in the section are going to be doing every 3 months. And then after the year is up, or at the end of this year, then this analyst will also be put into the once every 3-month rotation in terms of doing that monitoring.
The reason I was asking was because there was some controversy about many years ago when SWGDAM came out with its DAB requirements to check for contamination. How do you check for contamination within the lab? And so several individuals, I was one of them, would argue for the use of white testing of various areas, but we were soundly defeated on that question because the argument was that it's too much work. It's not a very good argument. But the second argument was you're going to find DNA everywhere anyway. Was an argument I heard at the time, that you're basically, if you're going to do that, you're going to find DNA. So that's just going to cause more trouble than it's worth. But it seems to me that issues like this, that some form of white testing is a good way of checking. The question is, what do you do if you do find it? Does it mean that there's gross contamination? And that's why I was asking, because obviously, if you went around this room, you'd find DNA everywhere, right? So does that mean you couldn't use this place as a lab? Once you could clean it and use it, but there's going to be some QA aspects to what you would do if you do find some contamination, that type of thing. So I'm just very interested in your approach to this. I'll be very interested in getting an update at some point, maybe in a year or so, to see how that process is working, or whether you've abandoned it or kept it.
Yeah. Building on that, Jack, it's just curious. When you're doing this, you want to make sure, like you say, it's meaningful, but also is the technique you're doing sensitive enough to pick up what you want to pick up. So if you're swabbing the whole pair of scissors to get something, you may be diluting down the DNA versus the very tip, which would be cutting something. So is there a way to build in a positive control, if you will, and not saying that you have to do it, but just running through to make sure that what you're doing is actually detecting what you want it to detect, and that you're actually finding those instances where you could lead to contamination. Because to institute a policy that says, hey, we're not finding anything, has to be as good as what you could encounter in real life. So one thing to set in and say, hey, we haven't found anything, hey, we're good, but you want to make sure it's sensitive enough to prove what you want it to do, so that you're not having this feeling that everything's good when actually it isn't. So just something to think about. I'm not sure how I would set it up personally.
Well, look, for example, low template DNA labs, right? They will have a separate approach to how they check for contamination versus the standard, STR analysis. And if you remember the old RFLP days, so when we moved from RFLP to PCR-based systems, we had to change a lot of what we were doing, because what happened in the RFLP days, we wouldn't pick up minor contamination. As soon as we went to PCR, we picked it up.
Yeah.
Same thing if you take a standard STR lab and you then perform LT-DNA on it. If you're not careful in your own lab, you're going to pick up some issues. So people are aware of that now, and I know that, for example, the OCME has procedures within their LT-DNA lab area that are probably pretty rigorous compared to most.
Just when we first did this back when the contamination first occurred, we did detect DNA that was present on the Samus instruments, and it was the profile that we were finding the contamination as well. The swabbing is limited to using a minimum amount of water, the tip of the swab, and swabbing the working area of the instrument. We're not swabbing the entire thing. There's no point in doing that.
Okay.
So, a point of clarification for me, since I'm not running or working in a lab like this, it would seem that one of the ways to get around this was that no implement was used on more than one case or more than one sample. But apparently that is not the situation. And it wasn't clear from the document here how often the implements were simply put through a rigorous cleaning procedure. You limited the number they had, and I understand from the previous meeting that there was a box of implements and clean ones were being contaminated with used ones. And you've now limited the number, but I didn't get a sense of how often the analyst simply uses completely cleaned, new, in that sense, implements.
Our protocols call that every time an implement is used on item of evidence, it is immediately cleaned by wiping it with ethanol and sticking it in a flame. So it's cleaned every time. And apparently that was not being followed once we closed this issue.
Okay.
See, I think that's a good cleaning procedure that you're using.
Yes.
I think it is.
Okay.
Where we got it from.
Yeah. If it was being followed, that's.
It's important.
Yeah. So any other comments or questions for Suffolk County? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. The next item is New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, and there's an update on corrective action. And the committee received a copy of a letter sent to ASCLD Lab from Dr. Prince, the director of the New York City OCME, and we have this letter in front of us. But I believe we have Eugene Lean, yeah, from New York City OCME, who give us a short briefing update as to what has transpired.
So, as the subcommittee may remember, we have a former technician that was reporting false negative serology results. We pulled the relevant negative cases to retest, and subsequent to that, we found discrepancies within kit inventories concerning items missing or items additional to that. We've completed the retesting portion of this corrective action. We're now moving on to the re-inventorying of the remainder of the kits. And in total, we're talking about 435 sexual assault kits or cases altogether, predominantly sexual assault kits. The initial retesting was on 115 sexual assault kits, and we had to recall the additional 330 cases that this technician had handled just to re-inventory. So in terms of the re-inventorying part, as of last Friday, we've re-inventoried 305 sexual assault kits. 7 items were not found in its original kit. This represents 11 cases, and the reason why the number, there's a disparity within that number is because 2 items could be in one case, and it could be additional to that. So we're counting the items and the cases that are affected, because if there's 1 item missing from one case and it's found in another case, that 1 item affects 2 cases. So that's why there's a disparity within those numbers. So it's 7 items, 11 cases. This is statistically lower than what we expected, as Part 2, according to these numbers, were 4.2% of inventory discrepancies versus 9.2% within Part 1. We are making corrections to those discrepancies as we speak, and to make sure that each kit's contents are accounted for. We have approximately 25 more cases to go, and once done, we will be writing up a final report for ASCOT Lab, in which the subcommittee and the commission will receive a copy of that concurrently and at the same time. And that's it at this point in time. We hope to wrap this up within the next month or so and have a report out to ASCOT Lab so that we can close this corrective action up, and that's it.
Thanks, Eugene. Comments, questions?
So, Eugene?
Yes.
There's, in order for material from one case to get into another case, both of these were open at the same time? Is that what happened?
And apparently it was.
Is that standard policy?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
The technician had it open at the same time, therefore, when she was closing up the kits, parts of one case ended up in another case, and that is not standard policy at all.
Are all items in each case marked with a case number?
Yes. Yes.
Other comments, questions? I notice, Eugene, that 26 of 116 cases were negative for serology,
That's
but then
correct.
were now positive. So these were omission as opposed to commission type of issues. So someone omitted to find, this individual omitted to find biological stains.
That's correct.
Is that, yeah.
Yes.
So this also brings up this issue of how do you, errors of omission and errors of commission are equally, can be bad. And what we've done in the forensic community is strive for correcting errors of commission. You detect that someone's made a mistake, you peer review, etc. And where we've kind of, as a community, what's happened is we've not spent as much time trying to prevent these errors of omission, right? And I remember the DNA Advisory Board was set up, and then there was a subsequent committee set up through Congress to determine whether or not blind testing at a national level would be an appropriate way of detecting errors of omission. That basically was a no-go because it was going to be too expensive for the nation, etc., etc. So my question is, does your lab do any form of retesting, blind testing, to look for, and it's just a general question, I'm not just interested to determine whether labs are beginning to address, because we spent a lot of time on the commission, what about the omission side of things? Do you do any blind retest, blind sampling, blind testing, resampling? What do you do, if anything, to look at this potential errors of omission?
Absolutely. We, ever since I believe, if I remember the dates correct, December of 2009, the laboratory has implemented a reanalysis program whereby we would pick randomly negative sexual assault kits to ensure that the results are as expected. Meaning, if the initial analyst reports everything as negative, the second analyst, hopefully and rightfully so, will find something that's negative in there as well. Should there be a discrepancy, obviously we will have to implement our corrective actions and corrections program within the laboratory to ensure that the kit is accurate when we report it. This is all done prior to reporting the case results, meaning the reanalysis program is meant to hijack, for lack of a better word, the case during the review process and reanalyze that so that we can ensure that the report that was written is appropriate prior to leaving the door of the laboratory. So yes, we do have a program in place. We randomly test approximately 4 to 5 kits every month to ensure that all the negative kits are as expected.
Is the second analyst blind to the fact that this was previously negative?
No, the first analyst is blind to the fact, but the second analyst is not blind to the fact. The second analyst does see the results, but we trust each analyst to be able to analyze everything and come up with results. And insofar as the program, we found it to be most rewarding when we did find a few things that we can improve within the program. So even despite the fact that the second analyst is not blind to the first results, we do have a pretty good success from this.
Plus the analysts in the lab then are aware that any case they do
Absolutely.
can be subject to random reanalysis,
Absolutely.
which is also an impetus for even being more careful than even
Absolutely.
normal. So
Absolutely.
Right, and it's not clear to me that the non-blindness would have any directional bias.
No, none at all.
okay. Yeah.
You mentioned that you found some things that were interesting from this program.
Right.
Could you just elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Amylase diffusion, for example, sample size is very important.
Yeah.
If something's at the borderline, what could become positive, it could be your sample size that you cut. There are things. These are the educational items that we've learned from this that we've spread out to the analysts to ensure that we try to ensure as much as possible that the sample sizes are consistent to each other. Yeah.
Are underwear included in the kit?
Yes, they are.
Any other comments, questions?
Just one,
Yeah.
just for fun. Somebody's finished a case, the report is all written up, boxed up, and then before that goes out, when it's getting supervisory review, then it goes into the hopper and says, okay, this one's going to go to this analyst for reanalysis. Is that how it works?
That is almost the way it works. We do not box up or we do not finalize the closing of the kit until the technical review is done.
Oh, okay.
So prior to technical review, my team hijacks this kit for random reanalysis.
Nice.
Eugene, how many cases undergo reanalysis per year?
Per year, about 48 it's about 4 to 5 per month. So I want to say 48 to 60 cases per year are undergoing random reanalysis.
What percentage is that?
In terms of the total number of sexual assault kits, this represents, if I can do the math quickly, I want to say 1 to 2%. However, do note that we're targeting negative cases. So out of the 3,000 kits within that we do receive, there are a lot of positive cases that do get confirmed in DNA analysis. These are the negative cases that we want to ensure that there is no errors of omission going out of the laboratory. So in terms of total, it's 1 to 2%. However, when you're looking at negative cases, I don't know exactly what the percentage is on that one.
Do you happen to know in general whether other labs in the state are using random reanalysis, just as a general?
I'm
general
not sure.
no.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
This was something that the NICLAC instituted, so I guess the laboratories in the state are using it.
It certainly seems that it should be a recommended practice.
Yeah. Maybe we could discuss this at a future meeting, maybe have it as a topic, the extent to which random reanalysis or some other blind testing is done because of these errors of omission. It's perhaps something we could put on the agenda as just a discussion item for future meetings. To get a better idea, because obviously we now know what OCME does, but what are the other labs doing? Okay. Thanks, Eugene. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a partial match update, this partial match update, this briefing is going to be given by New York City Police Department, and in fact, the individual giving this update, Chief of Detectives, hasn't been able to get here on time. He's on his way apparently. Is that correct? Yes. So if it's appropriate, maybe we should take a 10 or 15-minute break. So like a small adjournment. Is that what we call it? Adjournment? Small adjournment? Mini adjournment? For 10 or 15 minutes. Okay? So to allow Chief Pulaski to get here and give his presentation. Okay? So the meeting is now adjourned for 15 minutes.
What number?
Okay, hello, I'd like to reconvene this meeting of the New York State DNA Subcommittee. And the next item on the agenda is partial match update. And Chief Pulaski from the New York City Police Department is here to give us a briefing on this partial match policy or procedure.
Thank you, everybody. To my left is Deputy Inspector Manny Katranakis, who's really been the kind of heart and soul of this program. Worked with it very, very closely, done quite a bit of research on this, so he'll be helping me along the way. Or it's actually more like I'll be helping him because he's done all the work and I get to do the presentation. So we have a closed case that we would like to discuss. We have it as a homicide in the 4-5 precinct up in the Bronx, which occurs on August 5th, 2007. I don't know what identifier you might have on your paperwork, but what happens is the victim is fatally shot at a cookout at a park, and there are several hundred people present. A baseball cap is recovered about 60, 70 feet from where the shell casings that were discharged from the murder weapon are recovered. The cap is submitted for DNA testing. It produces a male DNA profile, which is our convicted offender. We develop a family tree. We look at 7 family members. 4 are excluded due to gender. So obviously a YSTR was done on the crime scene sample off of the cap. The father is excluded because he did not fit the description of the perpetrator that we had. He's an elderly gentleman. And then we have 2 sons, also part of this family tree, who are excluded due to age. So what we suspect happened here is that this was not probative, the cap was not probative to the actual homicide, that they were at the park and that the cap fell off and that it wasn't probative. So we've closed this case down. Then we have a second closed case, which is a rape in the 52nd precinct, which is in the northern Bronx. That occurred on September 18, 1994. A rape kit had been collected at the time of the crime. A vaginal swab produced a partial DNA match. And then when we did our interview of the victim, re-interview the victim, it reveals that the intercourse was consensual and no crime was committed. So we closed that case. And the rest of the cases that we have were all open cases. So.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments regarding these, what we've just heard? If not, I should like, we need a motion to enter into executive session to discuss information regarding current investigations that would impact effective law enforcement procedures.
So moved.
Any discussion? So all those in favour of moving into executive session? And let me first say that in terms of executive session, what happens here is that members of the committee and DCJS staff and the guest, Chief Pulaski and Inspector Katranakis, will remain, but the rest of the, is that correct, Everyone else?
Yes.
We'd have to leave for this part of the meeting. Okay, so all those in favour of going into executive session, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so I'll give. So I should like to reconvene the meeting again. We've come out of executive session, and we've reached the last item on the agenda. And the last item on the agenda is next meeting date and location, and that item has been already decided. It's September the 14th in New York City. And so with that, I should like to close the meeting. Thank you very much.